craze to sweep the country and most of the world too. Millions of people are addicted to hours of gazing at electronic images on game screens in arcades and in their own homes. What makes video games so popular? We search for an answer as we begin a special series on Video Fever, games people play.
Anyone who's ever put a quarter into a video game certainly knows this sound. It belongs to a game called Pac-Man. But Pac-Man is more than just another video game. It's rapidly becoming an
The latest electronic toy, it's already more popular than Space Invaders or Missile Command. So if you're a Pac-Man addict, there's good news.
Far over 70,000 games have been made of Pac-Man. That's more than Space Invaders, more than Asteroids. When it comes to video games, Pac-Man is king.
Demand for Pac-Man, for new Pac-Man games, is probably greater today than it was 4 or 5 months ago. It's like a snowball rolling down a very steep hill. It seems to gather momentum as it goes downhill. We feel that Pac-Man is perhaps the most universally accepted video game that's ever been created.
He also gobbles up quarters, as much as $12 million worth of quarters each week.
Pac-Man alone digested $200 million for its manufacturer, Valley Corporation's Midway.
Too much of a good thing has to your health. Find out now about Pac-Man, Brisk, and more. And we don't have to tell you that video games are taking this country by storm, keeping thousands of kids as well as adults glued to their flashing screens. But there are some people who are worried that the games could be having a negative effect on the players.
Percent of those surveyed suffered some injury, blisters, calluses, arthralgia or pain, or tendinitis from their fingers to their shoulders.
The development of the calluses and blisters are obvious. The complaints and the swelling secondary to the injury to the tendons were while they were standing at the tables playing the games.
I think that some of the dangers are overstated, but if there's any danger in these games, it seems to me it's that breaking up of the social contacts, that's such a loner sort of activity.
That the person's peer relationships, source of self-esteem, enjoyment in life, are wrapped up in video games, just as they might be in bowling.
We don't really prefer to use the word addictive if we think it's associated with negative connotations. We prefer to use the term compelling and highly popular, which obviously they are.
Well, video games fever has prompted a number of businesses to try to cash in on that billion-dollar craze. Book publishers and even movie producers are trying to make video games pay off for them.
Saturday morning pack preview party for the premiere of a new animated television show starring everybody's favorite video game hero, Pac-Man. He will be gobbling his way into the hearts of young and old alike.
Grandpa, want to play Pac-Man?
Pac-Man? Of course.
I'll show you, Grandpa.
Pac-Man is a video game cartridge you have to buy separately to play on the Atari video computer system. Your parents hook it up to the TV.
Those are supposed to be the ghosts after Pac-Man. Watch out, Grandpa! Stick with me. You'll get the hang of it.
This is the Atari video computer system. Pac-Man and other video game cartridges are each sold separately.
Have you played Atari today? Moment we have been waiting for. Who are we waiting for? Are you ready? All right, because right now, for the very first time anywhere, the most popular chomper in video game history. What's his name again? All right, roll it. Here I come. I got him now.
There he is.
Hey, which way is it, Pac-Man, anyway?
Thank goodness for new Pac-Man pasta from Chef Boyardee.
New Pac-Man pasta? Little spaghetti shaped like us. Delicious.
And because Chef Boyardee's packed with goodness, it's great when we have to eat and run.
New Pac-Man pasta from Chef Boyardee. With meatballs, without meatballs, or chicken flavor.
Morning, kids. It's a Pac-Man day with my crispy corn cereal coming your way.
With marshmallows.
Delicious. I'm Indy.
I'm Blinky.
I'm Tinky.
I'm Clyde. With the marshmallows you'll find inside of Pac-Man.
Part of this nutritious breakfast.
With marshmallows. Delicious.
Everything at Arby's is being gobbled up. There goes a roast beef deluxe. There goes a sub. Whoops, there goes our logo. Come to Arby's today for your fabulous Pac-Man blast.
Now, I'd like to meet the man whose voice is about to become a living legend, the voice of Pac-Man, Mr. Marty Ingalls.
There are two things you have to do, okay? First, you have to put on the Pac-Man gear, okay?
Oh, you brought it with you, are you? Oh, you're all prepared.
You're in your toy. And here, take a look at that, see? You can do it. You can do it. You can do the Pac-Man cereal. You can do the Pac-Man with Pac-Man marshmallows. You can open wide, gobble up the ghost and hide it inside. Marshmallow, orange, red, pink, and blue. Trouble up good or they might kill you. You can do it. You can do the Pac-Man.
Packed with marshmallows and corn puffs, Pac-Man cereal's part of a good breakfast.
You can do it. You can do the Pac-Man.
Pac-Man fever is back. I should say that Pac-Man fever has never really left, because, whether you realize it or not, Pac-Man is one of the few video games that has the distinction of being continuously in print since its release, or, in Pac-Man's case, its release on May 22nd, 1980. And in just a few short months, Pac-Man will be 40 years old. The fact that it has remained so successful after so many years with so many dynamic changes within the video game industry is a testament to the impact of this video game within the global culture and its historical significance within video game history. But that was not always the case. In fact, when Pac-Man was being developed, the executives at the then nascent Namco didn't think that Pac-Man was going to be a particularly successful arcade cabinet within the industry. They felt that the other title that they were developing at the time, Rally X, was actually going to be the more successful arcade game between the two. This fact was further backed up by the rather energetic response that Rally X received at trade shows at the time when compared to the rather tepid response that Pac-Man got at those same trade shows. And in fact, when you compare both games side by side, they're actually not that different from one another. In Rally X, the player controls a stock car that is traversing a maze. Within that maze, you have to collect a series of yellow flags, and in fact, you are being chased by enemy cars that are trying to kill you. And once you get all the yellow flags, you then complete the stage and go on to the next stage. Sounds pretty familiar, right? The only difference is that in Pac-Man, you play the eponymous Pac-Man, traversing a maze, collecting all the white dots in the maze, and avoiding enemy ghosts that are trying to kill you. So you're left with two games, both of which were released at the same time and also by the same company with similar gameplay and strategic depth. So why did one of these games become one of the most successful video game franchises in video game history, and the other one simply become the proverbial footnote? What happened? Why did Pac-Man become so successful and Rally X did not? In 1979, when Toru Iwatani-san was looking to create a new game in the video game market, he wanted to create something different, something new. When he looked at the then current arcades, all he saw were games that glorified war and violence, like Space Invaders, or he saw games that were largely centered around a particular sport, such as Atari's basketball. What all these games shared was that their target audience was men. that was the primary demographic of arcade goers at the time. And Toru Iwatani-san wanted to change that. He wanted to create something that was fun, cute, and with a female audience in mind to get more women and couples into the arcades. Pac-Man's success lies in his unintended yet universal appeal. Sure, the video game was designed with women and non-conventional gamers in mind. Something that would be repeated decades later by Nintendo with their development and subsequent success with the Nintendo Wii. But because it appealed to these demographics, by necessity it appealed to the casual gamer as well. And so Pac-Man rewards veteran players and new players alike. The challenge of the game scales depending on how good you are at the game. So whether it is your first quarter or your 100th quarter playing Pac-Man, the challenge is going to scale itself very nicely depending on how well you were able to play the game, and by extension provide a similar level of enjoyment. All players were welcome, and most, if not all players, accepted that invitation to play. Pac-Man sold over 350,000 cabinets in the first 18 months alone, bringing in over $1 billion in just over a year in the arcades. Today, that would be over $2.6 billion. To give that a little more perspective, the entire PlayStation gaming division for the entire year of 2018 only brought in a profit of $2.8 billion. And that includes console sales, peripheries, the PlayStation VR, first-party titles, streaming services, and more. Pac-Man is just one game. And that is in the first 18 months. It has had another 38 and a half years to generate additional profit and revenue. So it is easy to understand how Pac-Man is one of the most successful arcade games ever made. So, it is no surprise that Pac-Man got board games. And while the Pac-Man board game released by Milton Bradley came out in 1982, at the height of Pac-Man fever, what I want to look at in this episode is the Pac-Man board game from 2019. Because after almost 40 years, I want to see how a modern audience interprets Pac-Man as a cultural icon. How the legacy of Pac-Man after almost 40 years is distilled into an analog tabletop experience. Can it be done? And if it can, how do they do it? But before we look at the Pac-Man board game, I want to take a quick commercial break. And after the break, we will dive into the content and gameplay of the Pac-Man board game from 2019. You are watching the Arcade Castle.
Play to win. You never lose. When 7-Up's the one you choose. It's a natural kind of taste. Nothing else comes near. 7-Up cools your thirst. 7-Up, the difference is clear.
In the children's vitamin game, this is today's leader. But for moms who want to change the rules to no sugar and no additives, this is a better choice. New Pac-Man Children's Chewable Multivitamins. For no sugar, Pac-Man's better. Flintstones is over 70% sugar. For no additives, Pac-Man is better. So for complete nutrition of 10 essential vitamins plus iron without sugar or additives.
Goodbye, Fred. Hello, Pac-Man.
A better choice.
First the Pac-Man eats through a maze of dots. Then the Pac-Man heads for the corner spots. Then he eats his fill of a power pill. And then all those ghosts turn blue. Boo! And Pac-Man eats them all too.
Only Atari makes the Pac-Man home video game, and you can only play it on an Atari video game system.
Have you played Atari today?
Mr. Arcade, I need help. My husband won't come home.
Pac-Man, I can help.
Get him, Pac-Man!
Stand back. This is the official tabletop version of Midway's Pac-Man.
It looks the same.
And it plays the same. Monsters, power capsule sounds, even displays best score. And best of all,
You can take Pac-Man home.
Official Midway Pac-Man for 1 or 2 players. The arcade game you can take home with you from Coleco.
風が食われるかトミーパックマン。怖いモンスターを避けながらパックパック餌を食う。迷路に潜むパワー餌。うまく食べるとやつもやってくれてる敵討ちだってんで逆にモンスターを食べられる。それもつかのは7秒間。逆転逆転大得点。チェリーを食べるとまた得点。おっと危ないワープでドローン。これがトミーの。
Welcome back after the break. And so, without further ado, let us take a look at the Pac-Man board game from 2019. The contents of the 2019 Pac-Man board game are 1 maze game board, which is in 5 pieces, 1 electronic Pac-Man pawn, 4 ghost pawns, Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde, 40 ghost cards split between 35 level 1 ghost cards and 5 level 2 ghost cards, 4 ghost eyes tokens, 16 blue ghost tokens, 4 power pellet tokens, 3 Pac-Man life tokens, 3 fruit tokens, 4 scoring pieces, 1 high score notepad, 3 yellow Pac-Man dice, the rules, and, last but not least, the power pellets that Pac-Man will be eating throughout the course of the game. Setting up the Pac-Man board game is pretty straightforward. The first time you take the game out of the box, you will need to do several things. First, you will need to take the Pac-Man Start Space sticker and the empty Power Pellet stickers and place them in their respective positions on the game board. After you have done this, you will take all of the yellow pegs that represent the dots that Pac-Man will be eating throughout the course of the game and plugging them in to all the holes that are present on the game board. Once you have done these 2 things, the game will be ready to be set up for play. First and foremost, what you will need to do is take each piece of the game board, flip it upside down, and press down on all the yellow pegs to ensure that all the yellow pegs are in their up positions when you're ready to start play. And placing the 4 power pellet tokens on the empty power pellet spaces. You will then take the deck of cards and remove the 5 yellow level 2 cards, provided you're not playing in arcade mode or starting at level 2 of the game, and placing them inside the box. You will take the remaining 35 blue level 1 cards, shuffle them, and place them to the side of the game board. In addition, you will take the full set of 16 blue ghost eye tokens and placing them also near the side of the game board. You will take the 4 ghosts and place them on their respective starting spaces, with Blinky being at the entrance of the ghost house, and the other 3 inside the ghost house. Once you have done this, you will take your electronic Pac-Man, insert the batteries if you have not done so already, and place him on the Pac-Man starting space. Once you have done this, you are ready for play. The Pac-Man board game from 2019 is played over a series of rounds, equal to the number of players playing. With each round, one player is playing as Pac-Man, while the other players are playing as ghosts. It is the objective of Pac-Man to navigate the maze, eat Pac-Dots, collect fruit, and potentially eat ghosts to try and achieve the highest score possible on their round. It is the objective of the players who are playing the ghosts to collectively work together and try and defeat Pac-Man as quickly as possible to try and keep Pac-Man's score as low as possible. Because after each player takes a turn as Pac-Man, the player with the highest score wins the game. In a given round, the player who is playing as Pac-Man goes first, and the way that player will be able to navigate the maze is by rolling the 3 d6 dice that come with the game, adding up their values, and moving that number of spaces within the maze. Each Pac-Dot, Power Pellet, and grayed out space each count as one space within the maze. Pac-Man can move forwards or backwards, up and down within the maze. Additionally, the players playing as Pac-Man may choose to move back and forth between 2 spots if they wish, if they find that to be strategically advantageous. The only thing that the player who is playing as Pac-Man must do is moving the number of spaces that were rolled with the dice. Also, there are really only 2 things that will end Pac-Man's turn early. First and foremost is encountering a ghost, which will end the round, and second will be landing on a Power Pellet space. More on that in a moment. After Pac-Man has taken its turn, the ghosts will then get their turn to try and get Pac-Man. However, unlike Pac-Man, who utilizes dice to dictate movement, the ghosts have a deck of cards that not only dictate the order in which they move, but how many spaces they are allowed to move on their turn. The ghosts on their turn will flip the top card over and move as indicated. However, there are a couple of conditional modifiers to their abilities to move. For example, when the ghosts are leaving the ghost house for the first time, Blinky must be the first to exit, which mimics the arcade game's mechanics pretty well. So, if you flip over a card and indicates Pinky is the first in the turn order to move, Pinky loses their turn because they cannot exit the ghost house before Blinky. Additionally, like the arcade game, the ghosts must move in a continuous direction. They can go up, down, left, or right, just like Pac-Man, but they cannot suddenly switch directions and go in reverse. If on the ghost's turn they draw a fruit card, they must then place a fruit token on Pac-Man's starting space, which may allow the player who is playing Pac-Man to achieve an even higher score. After they have placed a fruit token on the starting space, the ghosts will then draw another card and play will continue. However, if there is already a fruit token present on Pac-Man's starting space, or if Pac-Man has already gotten all 3 fruit tokens on their turn, then the card is simply discarded and play continues as normal. Whenever Pac-Man lands on a Power Pellet, his movement ends. However, that does not mean his turn ends, because Pac-Man, energized with the Power Pellet, will now take 3 additional moves. Pac-Man will roll a single d6, move the indicated number of spaces, roll a second d6, move the indicated number of spaces, and then finally roll a third d6 and move the indicated number of spaces. And at any point, when Pac-Man is energized with the Power Pellet, Pac-Man has the ability to eat ghosts. And, should Pac-Man have the good fortune to land on a ghost, several things happen. First and foremost, you will swap the ghost pawn with its corresponding Ghost Eyes token. The Ghost Eyes token acts like a pawn for that player, and the player must use their movement in subsequent turns to move the Ghost Eyes token back to the ghost house in order to rejuvenate as a ghost and chase Pac-Man once more. Secondly, whenever Pac-Man consumes a ghost, Pac-Man will get a blue ghost token and place that in front of them in their score pile. And finally, consuming a ghost does not end your movement, and Pac-Man will continue through the ghost, not unlike the arcade, until his movement for all 3 dice rolls is completed, and then Pac-Man's turn is finally at its end. Once the player who is playing as Pac-Man is defeated by the ghosts, he or she will tally up their points to get their final score. For each quadrant of the board that Pac-Man was able to clear by successfully eating all of the Pac dots, that player will get a token worth 800 points. If they're able to clear all 4 quadrants and clear the entire stage, they will get a maximum of 3,200 points. The ghost tokens the player obtained through eating ghosts while energized with the power pellet are worth 200 points each. Finally, Pac-Man will add up the point values of the fruits they were able to eat during the course of play to their total, with the cherry token being worth 100 points, the strawberry token being worth 200 points, and the orange token being worth a whopping 500 points. For the arcade purists, however, Buffalo Games has added an alternate scoring mechanism to the game that more closely mimics the arcade experience, to where each individual Pac dot is worth 40 points. If Pac-Man successfully clears the stage, the round does not end. In fact, players will reset the game board and play will continue on stage 2. What players will do is add the gold bordered stage 2 cards to the ghosts' movement deck, which make the ghosts much more powerful, extend their movement ranges, and thus make it much harder for Pac-Man to outmaneuver his ghostly opponents. Once every player has tallied up their scores, whoever has the highest score will be the winner of the Pac-Man board game from 2019. And that is the Pac-Man board game from 2019, developed by Buffalo Games in association with Namco. And overall, I feel like the Pac-Man board game from 2019 is a pretty good general representation of what Pac-Man is and how Pac-Man is played by the average player. And I appreciate the fact that Buffalo Games has created a more arcade purist point system with 40 points per Pac dot, even though if you're playing with the arcade purist point system versus the standard point system, you're actually going to be earning less points per stage if you're using the more arcade purist version. Additionally, there is a more arcade-oriented mode to where players will have 3 lives, and if they are touched by a ghost, then they will lose 1 life instead of their round ending. The difference there is the stage 2 gold-bordered ghost cards are shuffled into the deck from the get-go, so the game doesn't last forever and ever and ever, which can be a problem with some games where they run a bit too long. And I was happy to see several elements of Onomatocodeia within the Pac-Man board game from 2019. And what Onomatocodeia is when an element of digital coding or digital programming or algorithms are successfully translated in almost a one-to-one format into an analog format. Or in the case of today's episode, elements of programming from the Pac-Man arcade game being successfully translated into the analog tabletop Pac-Man board game. A good example of this is the rules dictating how the ghosts move in the Pac-Man board game. For example, the ghosts can only move in a continuous line forward during their movement. Sure, they can go up, down, left, or right whenever they reach a fork in the road within the maze, but they must always move forward. They cannot double back on their own trails. And, largely without exception, the ghosts cannot do this within the arcade game as well. Additionally, the fact that Blinky has to be the first one out of the ghost house also imitates the ghosts exiting of the ghost house in the arcade game as well. A further illustration of the differences between Onomatocodeia and simply utilizing a game's assets is the fact that the Pac-Man pawn, whenever you eat a Pac Dot, will make the classic Waka Waka sound. The utilization of in-game assets does not necessarily create Onomatocodeia unless the assets themselves are in turn governed by logic or rules or mechanics that themselves mimic digital coding, digital algorithms, and digital programming. So without further ado, we will conclude today's episode of Onomatocodeia, and I thank you for sticking with me on this rather long episode where I'm trying to figure out the formatting, the layout, and all this fun stuff, and I hope to see you in the next episode. As always, thank you for watching.